To introduce this morning's session, a lot of us use performance measures, but I don't know how many people out there have moved beyond those to performance management, which is its own amazing thing. So this morning, I'm honored to introduce Liston. She served as the deputy manager in Coral Springs, Florida, which in 2007 was the recipient of the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, which is the nation's highest presidential honor for organizational excellence. It's pretty amazing. She was a key member of the management team that drafted the city's quality initiatives, as well as the in-house team that wrote the Malcolm Baldrige application. Ms. Liston managed the city's business planning process, including the production of the business plan, a key document that links the city's strategic plan with its annual budget. She now consults with cities and counties. And prior to moving to Florida, Ms. Liston served as the assistant county manager in Orange County, North Carolina, and she was a budget officer in Durham. We also have with us David Ammons. I'm sure many of you are familiar with David, but he is an Albert Coates Professor of Public Administration and Government at UNC School of Government. He served as a member of the National Performance Measurement Advisory Commission and works with local governments on performance measurement, benchmarking, and productivity improvement. His recent works include municipal benchmarks, assessing local government performance and establishing community standards, tools for decision making, and leading performance management in local government. David, Ellen.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's nice to be here and see so many familiar faces. We're gonna do a couple of things today. First, in keeping with our title here of our session, we're going to try to give you some assessment of where local governments are in terms of performance management. And in doing that, we're going to introduce general elements of performance management that you can use as your own checklist. So as we work our way through, you can be considering how far along you are in your organization in terms of performance management. And the second thing we're going to do is having Ellen here and her relationship with Coral Springs. She's going to give us some insights into the Coral Springs approach to performance management. And as was mentioned, Coral Springs earned the Baldrige Award. What wasn't mentioned was that although lots of corporations had earned Baldrige Awards, Coral Springs was the first local government to earn a Baldrige Award. So it's a really big deal, and Coral Springs is an impressive organization. Let's turn first to our question of performance management. Are we there yet? And in addressing this, let's consider what performance management is and what it isn't. Performance measurement isn't performance management. That is, if you're thinking, well, yeah, we measure performance and we report performance. So yes, we're engaged in performance management. Well, not really. That's a necessary ingredient, but it's not the same thing. Strategic planning is not performance management. Benchmarking is not performance management. Having a dashboard is not performance management. We support all those things. Those are all good things to do. But just because we measure performance, just because we have a strategic plan or we have a dashboard, doesn't mean that we're really using performance information to improve policy results or improve services. It takes something more than that to really be engaged in performance management. Let me just pick out a few things from this statement about performance management that I want to emphasize. First of all, it's not passive. Very often we can say, well, you know, if we have a performance management system, or if we have a performance measurement system, or if we have a performance budgeting system, then that's going to be our key. Well, you know, those are all helpful tools potentially, but they're also potentially very passive. Now, it didn't feel passive when we were developing our performance measures. That felt like a lot of work. And it didn't feel passive when we were doing our strategic plan. That felt like a lot of work. But if we thought that just doing it to that point, we could then sit back and reap the benefits, because surely if we're measuring performance, or surely if we've declared what our goals are, then good things are going to happen from that. Right? Well, we all know that they don't necessarily follow, and so performance management is the active part that follows those things. It's more than simply declaring those goals and hoping that folks will respond, or more than simply measuring performance. So, what are we saying here? Well, we're saying that as much as we may endorse performance measurement, performance budgeting, performance pay, those in and of themselves can be just passive systems of rules, deadlines, and reports, unless somebody is really applying the leadership, doing the work that is needed to make those things happen. Fundamentally, we're talking about using performance information to influence our results, to influence our operations. Okay, so what is it that proponents of performance management say we have to make this work? What are the elements that have to be there if we're truly engaged in performance management? Well, we got to have goal clarity, right? We got to know what it is we're trying to achieve. And we may think of that in terms of strategic planning and overall overarching goals and having that in place, and certainly that's important. But it's also a matter of whether the recreation supervisor knows what it is that they're trying to accomplish in their corner of the organization. Are they clear on what their goals are, what it is they're trying to achieve? Performance information that's relevant, actionable, and readily available. Now we're into our scorecard here now, or our checklist that you be playing along at home here with your home organization. Do you have goal clarity? Is it goal clarity just in terms of you've got your strategic plan and your strategic goals, and the council understands what those are, management teams understands what those, is there goal clarity throughout the organization? And then you come to this one and you say, well, we've got our set of performance measures. Well, look at the whole thing here. Are they relevant, actionable, and readily available? When with a given performance measure at the operating level, they look at that and they say, well, what am I supposed to do with that? I see the number, but what am I supposed to do about that? If it's not really actionable, then give yourselves partial credit here. Okay? Greater emphasis of results than inputs and compliance with procedures. Our notions of bureaucracy and being all about compliance with procedures rather than focus on real results. Obviously, compliance is important, but does that dominate everything? If we're not getting the results that we're after, are we willing to challenge those procedures, maybe get them changed, or is it strictly allegiance to those procedures? We've got to follow these, and results are a lower priority or even an afterthought. Engagement of elected officials in priority setting, strategic goals, data influence decision making. What is the role of our elected officials? What should the role be? Are we in fact expecting the elected officials to be the primary players in performance management? Is that what we're thinking? We're funneling information up there to the top for them to make decisions? Is that really their role? After all, we're talking management here. Or is their role really about expressing the citizens' view about priorities and overarching goals and being receptive to management analysis based upon performance information. Is the performance management action really supposed to be happening at lower levels of the organization? Are we really expecting elected officials to be more engaged in performance management than their role would prescribe? Okay. Engagement of top executives in performance management. How involved are your top executives in performance management? And again, the question is going to be, how involved should they be? Where do we want them to be there? Devolved decision authority. Performance management doctrine suggests that the people who know the most about that particular operation, the ones that are likely to be most perceptive about what is holding that operation back from getting the kinds of results that it should be getting, are the people at the operating level. Do they have the decision authority that they need in order to make the operating changes that are necessary to get the performance results that you're really after? Now, this is key. If there's one thing from my part of the presentation here that I'd like for you to really think about is this business of devolved decision authority that is an essential element of performance management doctrine. People who have studied organizations that are engaged in performance management or hope to be engaged in performance management have said that if performance management is happening, it's more likely to be happening at the program level than it is at the top in some overarching sense. So again, if our notion of performance management is that we are channeling information up to the top of the organization for them to make decisions, we may be putting our eggs in the wrong basket. The decision makers that we need to be focused on are the ones at the program level. Think about that. Is our notion of performance management that we're sending information up to the top for them to make decisions? Or is our notion of performance management being sure that we've got the information that those program officials have in order for them to make decisions? Now, we're sending information up to the top because there's a trade-off here. People at the top are not real keen on sending decision authority lower in the organization unless they are getting performance information that reassures them that progress is being made on important matters, that services are improving, that management is advancing as it should. It's a trade-off. There's information going up to reassure the people at the top that the progress is being made on important priorities and the services are being delivered well, in exchange for devolved decision authority, giving those folks at the program level the decision authority that they need to actually engage in performance management. What we find is that in most organizations, we only get half of that bargain. People at the top are perfectly fine with requiring performance information to flow up, but they're very reluctant about devolved decision authority. This is one of the elements where we frequently see a breakdown in the doctrine of performance management. Along with this is managerial flexibility in the use of resources. Do the people at the operating level really have flexibility to be able to use resources, whether we're talking about dollars or whether we're talking about personnel resources. And finally, performance management doctrine calls for incentives and sanctions tied to performance. The mantra of performance management is make managers manage and let managers manage. Now that make managers manage is that we need to have that information flow that shows that we are actually managing those operations. That is, we need to provide assurances at the top of the organization that we're actually getting real progress on important matters to the organization, that we're getting good, high-quality services, good efficiency, and so forth. But the other half of that is that we give those managers the real authority that they need in order to be able to manage. We've looked at, when I say we, I've worked with Ellen, with Jordan Jones, with Dale Rennick, over the last few years on a set of organizations, local governments that have been recognized for their performance management. We found 91 local governments that were mentioned in various publications and so forth as being really good about with performance management, and we got information from as many of those as we could, and we got complete information from 66 of those local governments, 45 cities, 21 counties, across the country, different sizes, some relatively large, some very large, some very small. Among those 66, what were the characteristics that we found? Well, one of the things we found was that not all of those really deserve the reputation that they have. Maybe those with PR, but maybe not quite as exemplary in performance management as their reputation would suggest, but a bunch of them really were impressive. The full set tends to be good at performance measurement. Tends to be good at performance measurement. And they don't rely just on workload or output measures. They measure a lot, and it's good quality. Most of them do strategic planning. Some of them will link their strategic goals to their performance management efforts, but not all of them. This set tends to grant significant discretion to the department level, but then it stops there. It hits comes to a screeching halt, and very few of them allow considerable discretion to the operating supervisors. These 66 tend to have their senior managers, folks outside of the operating departments, engaged in regular review of performance reports. One of the things that we looked at was how often do these senior managers intervene in operational decisions. The sweet spot here, the sweet spot that we were really looking for, according to performance management doctrine, would be where we've got the senior managers engaged in monitoring, but only rarely intervening. You see why that would be the sweet spot? If we've got frequent intervention, then we've essentially got management from the top. We really don't have devolved decision authority. So what we'd be looking for is somebody who at the top is frequently monitoring and is providing feedback and saying, making good progress here, or I'm concerned about why we're not making progress here. You need to be doing something about that at the operating level. What are your ideas about fixing? You see what I'm saying? The difference between saying, I've been monitoring these reports and here's what I want you to do. If we've got that happening a lot, then we don't really have devolved decision authority. You with me? Okay, we've got, among this set, we've got lots of them that have senior managers reviewing. But we also have lots of them where there's frequent intervention in operating. And in fact, we only get that sweet spot in a relative handful of these jurisdictions, where in fact they've got engaged executives, but they're also insisting on letting managers manage. Okay? Letting managers manage and making managers manage. Okay, and these are no more likely than local governments in general to have performance-based incentives and sanctions. Well, what did we find when we start looking at our data set and comparing what difference it makes? Well, linking strategic goals and performance management significantly increases the benefits that they're reporting. Okay? If all they're doing is doing strategic planning, then we really can't tell any difference in the reported performance management benefits compared to those that aren't doing strategic planning. But if they're doing strategic planning and they're tying to that to their performance management efforts, then that makes a difference. Those organizations that have senior managers that are routinely reviewing performance reports and letting people know that they're reviewing them, it makes a difference in the results they get. And we also get some evidence, even though we get down to a really small sample size in those that hit that sweet spot, that makes a difference, that makes for even better results. Some key elements I'll just run through real quickly here and let Ellen jump up here to tell you about Coral Springs. Some of the things that we really need to focus on, if you did your checklist here and you're not quite satisfied with where you stand, think about these things. Do you really have a performance culture? Are your performance measures good enough that you really are clear on how you're doing? And are there clear expectations for where you want to be on these dimensions of performance? And is it important to people in the organization that you achieve those expectations? Is it really tied in meaningfully into your decision systems, management systems? A few things that I want to leave you with here. Who's the primary audience for your performance information? Citizens? The council or commission? City manager? If it is, are you really getting the performance information to the decision makers where it's likely to do the most good in terms of performance management? Those may not be these decision makers, maybe these decision makers. Now, clearly, the citizens and the council and the manager are important audiences, but maybe should they be secondary audiences? Important secondary audiences. But are you really getting the performance information in actionable form to the decision makers who are most likely to engage in performance management? Think about your IT resources. Are you devoting IT resources to getting performance information to the budget office or the HR, to finance, or the council or the citizens? Are you devoting the IT resources that you need to get actionable performance information to the public works director, the fire chief? Think about where you're devoting your resources. Are you frustrated by lack of performance data use? Where's your frustration directed? You're saying, council isn't paying attention to this. The manager isn't using the performance information. Is that where your frustration is? Does that betray that your own sense of what performance management is about is a little bit misdirected? Or are you frustrated that you're getting good performance information to those operating officials and they're not using it? In which case, you're very much in sync with the thinking on performance management. Should you be more concerned if the operating officials have excellent performance information and they're not using it? And finally, which is more impressive in your organization? Somebody asks you about performance management in your organization. Do you show them the trappings of performance management? We got this great chart. This is how it all dovetails together, or at least it's supposed to. Or do you immediately go to talking about how we made this change in our services or in our service delivery pattern because we saw from our performance information that we weren't getting the results before that we needed, and we made those changes. Okay, let me turn it over to Ellen. We'll hear about Coral Springs.
David. You all may be wondering where the heck is Coral Springs, and I want to show you. We're right there. We're just west of Fort Lauderdale. We're a city of about 125,000. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we always start by trying to introduce people to what we call the model that we used in Coral Springs, our business model. We used it as a tool to help set the right priorities, and more importantly, to make sure that the organization continues to focus on those priorities throughout the year, and how we depended on citizen input as a listening input, but also on data analysis from our employees as another listening input. And both of those are very critical inputs into the strategic planning process. You have one without the other, it just doesn't work. From the strategic plan, we go to the business plan, and in our model, we kind of inserted the business plan in between the strategic plan and the budget as a way of really focusing on, continuing to focus on those priorities throughout the year. And in fact, the business plan was the city manager's work plan. At the end of the year, when he was evaluated by the city commission, he was evaluated on the key intended outcomes and the initiatives that were included in that business plan. So it was really clear what he was supposed to do that year. There are also initiatives in the business plan that each department director would be in charge of, and he would finance or fund those initiatives within the business plan. And then, of course, into the budget. Oh, I already went to the next one. In this chart, what we're trying to say is that the city commission owns the strategic plan. They really do. That is where they live. And we talk a lot about, who belongs where in this process. Coral Springs, the city commission belongs with the strategic plan. They're very involved in it. They can take ownership of it. Staff owns the implementation of business plan and the budget, and that's also very clear in the model. So I want to talk a little bit about engaging the governing board and what is the proper role of the governing board in performance management for Coral Springs. And I want to bring up timing of the strategic planning process, just because from a very practical perspective, we found that it simply wasn't working at all for us if we had a commission that was trying to work off of the prior commission's strategic goals. Never worked for us, not one bit, never had any interest in it, and we learned very early on that we were going to have to time our strategic planning process so that after a new election, which for us was every 2 years, we immediately got into a new strategic planning process, and each of our commissioners would feel very involved in it and felt like it was going to be theirs. And they felt like we were incorporating the input from all of our elected officials. And they also wanted to know that we were incorporating input for people who were important to them, their constituents, a lot of them on boards and committees. That we would use regular reporting in an easy-to-use format to help build credibility with our governing board, so that they knew that we were going to report when the news was good, when the news was bad, and when the news was really ugly. But we established our credibility. They knew that we were going to be And we would give it to them at the beginning of every major workshop, like a business planning workshop, a strategic planning workshop, a budgeting workshop. It turned out to be about 3 times a year. And we would hand it to them and discuss it with them. And that for us made a huge difference. It never worked for us to put together a nice, beautiful quarterly report and put it on somebody's desk. Never did anything for us. What worked for us was actually handing out this 1-page Excel spreadsheet, but discussing it. Here's what's working, and we're really having a problem with crime in the parks. That's why we're not meeting the crime prevention numbers that we had right away. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing about it. We're going to need your support on that too. And those discussions were really valuable in again, getting the commission support for performance management efforts. And it goes to what David is saying about performance management is not a passive process. It's not a, you do the report and you send it out and you're done. It's a really active process. And lastly, model the behavior that you want to encourage. And if we're not modeling it, then we can't really expect anybody else to be using it. So an example of that would be, every year our commissioners would go to NLC meetings, and they'd come back from the NLC meetings all excited about something new that they wanted to launch. And in this one case, I'm sure this never happens to all of you, right? In this one case, the commissioner was very excited about automatic defibrillators, the AEDs. And he had seen this great presentation, and these cities were using the AEDs to save lives, and we were going to do this in Coral Springs, and we were going to do it now. Commission went along with them. They passed the resolution. We were supposed to put together an ordinance and bring it back in 2 weeks, and we were going to get this done. And of course, the next morning at staff meeting where the city manager is talking to all the staff members and how we're going to do this, and staff is, how did this happen so quickly? And the fire chief said, listen, give me a week and let me go back and look at what the data says about where heart attacks really happen in the city of Coral Springs. The city manager says, I'll get you that. Following week, he comes back and he says, okay, what they directed us to do was to put an AED in every restaurant in Coral Springs, but let me show you where heart attacks really happen. It is true that they happen in larger restaurants. That makes sense. They also happen in gyms. Let's do something about that. They also happen in city facilities, in city parks. Let's do something about that. And when we went back to the commission at the next meeting and showed them, yes, we are going to implement this ordinance that you were so excited about, and we're going to do it by following the data. Here's where the heart attacks happen. Here's how it's going to help Coral Springs. That's modeling the behavior that we wanted to encourage. We're modeling it for our commission, and we're also modeling it for our staff. So we talked about commission engagement. I want to talk about workforce engagement for a second here too. And you can see that we've tried to do this linkage, and as David talked about, one of the things that we found in this survey was that cities were more successful, not just if they used strategic planning, but if they linked their strategic planning efforts to performance management. And this was the City of Coral Springs' effort to make that linkage happen. And it goes all the way down to the individual employee. You call it the golden thread that links the strategic thinking to actual operations in the field. So the city mission, of course, is set by the city commission. The key intended outcomes are also set in the strategic plan by the city commission. The department objectives, each department is going to have their own objectives, and they're going to be linked to the key intended outcomes. And each individual employee also has objectives. I'm sure your employees have objectives too. They're set in their annual, oops, I keep on touching that. Set in their annual evaluations, and their raises are partially dependent upon meeting those objectives. And every year when you sit down with your employees, you sit down with the employee and you talk about their personal objectives and how they link up to their department objectives and how those link up to the citywide key intended outcomes. Now, Dave and I have had this conversation over the years about, does it really make sense for every single individual individual employee objective to have to match a department objective? And does it really make sense for every single department objective to have to match a citywide key intended outcome? And I know different people have different answers for that, and my individual answer is, you know, this is supposed to be a big picture exercise, and let's not get so bogged down in the details that we lose the big picture. The big picture is we're looking to make sure that everybody on our boat is rowing in the right direction. And our employees are the ones with the oars, so let's make sure they're in the picture too. Well, we all know what gets measured gets done, but sometimes we forget that what we talk about every day really impacts our employees. And I'll give one example about the recreation department. In our city, recreation was responsible for median maintenance. And median maintenance got to be a really big deal for citizens. And we knew this because in our citizen surveys every year, it would come up over and over again. Citizens felt like, when I drive into the city of Coral Springs, I want to see something in our entryways that really looks nice. It makes it look like things are going well, we're under control, this is important to us. Recreation employees, however, what do they hear about day in and day out? They hear from parents about ball field maintenance. It's ball field maintenance on Monday, it's ball field maintenance on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It is ball field maintenance day in and day out. That's what they hear about. That's what their supervisors hear about. And that's what gets talked about day in and day out. Whoever talked about median maintenance with the guys in the field? Nobody. We didn't really think about it. We knew it was important. We knew it was important to the commission. But it wasn't one of those things that comes up in everyday conversation, because the phone calls coming in were all about ball field maintenance. So it's something that we had to continually remind ourselves about, is we have a responsibility to talk about the things that are important to us, not just amongst ourselves, but with the people who have the ability to actually do something about it. Okay, I know you can't read this. I can't read it either. But this is an example of the one-page summary that we would give to the City Commission on a regular basis. And it was just really an Excel spreadsheet. And it would have about 30 key intended outcomes that the Commission would agree upon. And this was the city manager's work plan, and we would report this, like I said, about 3 times a year, and we'd have about 3 years of prior year's data. And then we would have a couple of columns about how we're doing to date in the first quarter, second quarter. And then the last column would be, how are we doing? Are we on track to meet this goal? Are we not on track to meet this goal? Have we already met it? And at the very bottom there, you can see this little box where we give ourselves a scorecard. And the KIOs are things like city's customer service rating in the annual survey, the city's bond rating, the percent of plans that are approved or reviewed within 15 days, the crime rate, stuff like that. Okay. Not stuff like this. This is not something that we would be delivering to the City Commission. In fact, I would look at this and it would give you a headache. But this is the actionable stuff that David talks about. This is the good stuff. This is not where the City Commission lives, and it's not where the City Manager's office lives. This is accidents at major intersections in the city of Coral Springs, and that actually was a key intended outcome from the City Commission. They wanted to make sure we're doing whatever we can to reduce accidents, especially as our population had been increasing. So the sergeant in the police department, he puts together this chart. And what he finds is that big bold blue line is the intersection of Sample and Riverside. That's not our biggest intersection. It's not our busiest intersection, but it's where we have the most accidents. So this is a great example of how the data doesn't usually provide you the answer. It provides you the right question to ask. So in this case, he's put together this chart and he's now saying, why is the intersection of Sample and Riverside our top producer of accidents when it's not our major intersection? It's not our busiest intersection. So he goes back and he has access to all kinds of information. He goes back and tracks every single accident at the corner of Riverside and Sample. what does he find? That most of them happened from a driver who was driving westbound on Sample trying to make a left onto Riverside, and there was no protected left turn signal there. And since he is empowered to do something about this, he goes down to the county, because the county does traffic engineering. He goes down to the county, shows them all of his data, and says, I think we really need a protected left turn signal. And can you see on this chart the time at which that left turn signal was put into place? It had a huge impact. The city commission said that accidents at major intersections was important, so that they're watching that number. City manager's office is watching that number, but we don't have the ability to make that happen. It's that sergeant in the police department who puts together that data, asks the right questions, who's able to actually make that happen. Well, that's the chart that actually puts it all together, and you always like this one. This is the one I would always say is more controllable. We would like seeing this chart in the city manager's office, but it's not the one that gives you the actionable data. That's the one that the sergeant of the police department's going to. Let me go into one more example before I get to this one. What do you do when the indicators indicate, they point to a problem? And the problem may be a personnel problem. And so I'll give an example in code enforcement. So in code enforcement, we noticed in the city manager's office that complaints were going up. So it's as part of the normal conversations that you have about your departmental objectives. We're talking about the complaints are up, so what's up with that? And they said initially, well, you know, complaints are up, but violations are down. So that must be a good thing. Maybe this is an anomaly. And maybe it is. Sometimes it just happens. But they go back, and the analyst in the department goes and does some more digging, because it's the analyst who has the ability to get into the real data that would be actionable. And what the analyst finds is that there's been some turnover in the department, and that they have a bunch of new employees. And the new employees' workload is less than 75% of what the existing employees' workload has been. And that's really affecting, that's why the violations are down. And the end result is that that's also why the complaints are up. So what do you do about that? And here's where your organizational culture really, really matters. So what do you do when you get news like that? I mean, your knee-jerk reaction is, well, new employees stink, right? But is that the right reaction? And if you start banging people on the head with a frying pan as soon as the numbers are bad, what do employees do? They're going to start hiding bad information from you. They need to know that we're looking at this as we're all in this together. So a more measured response to that situation is probably, we have a process problem. And the process problem is in our training of new employees. And indeed, that is the root cause of that particular problem. But it also sends a message to our employees. We used to have a mantra: blame the process, not the person. Always blame the process, not the person. Invariably, it was not these new employees' fault. It was a bunch of them. They all had the same problem. It was the process. Oops. I didn't talk about this one yet. Okay. So, nothing you can't spell will ever work. Now, I like that quote, and I think there's something in it. We really took an approach that said, let's not make this overly complex. Let's make it as simple as we can. Let's make it as understandable to our commission as we can. Let's make it as understandable to our staff as we can. We wanted it practical, and actionable. We wanted feedback loops that allow people, both citizens and our own employees, to see how their input into that model that you saw at the very beginning, how their input makes a difference, how we're actually listening to them, and they can see the impact of it. A flat organization means you don't have to get 6 approvals to make a single decision. And one of of the advantages, I think, to having gone through budget problems is that you do cut out a lot of the layers in your organization that slow things down. And we wanted to be fast on our feet. Openness and transparency, really an issue these days for all government, but definitely helpful in making sure that our commission was supportive and that we had built credibility with them. And the last one, our city manager, when he was asked at the conference at Baldridge, when we were recipients of the Baldridge Award, he was asked to sum up his advice to public entities. And what he said was, data trumps politics. And I might add, usually. Sometimes only politics trumps politics. But, and we know we live in the real world, but usually data trumps politics. When you have the data in front of you and you present it in a way that's understandable to everybody in the room, good decisions get made. We recognized early on that our citizens did not care about any trophies. They didn't care about a Baldridge Award. That's not what matters to them. What matters to the citizen is results. And we had a trainer who used to say all the time, what does it look like when it's right? In order to understand what you're trying to do, what does it look like when it's right? So for our citizens, the customer satisfaction rating in our annual survey was 95%. They wanted to tackle a low tax rate, especially as compared to our local neighbors. They wanted a low crime rate, especially as compared to other Florida cities. And we knew that having happy and motivated employees was going to be critical too, because after all, they're the ones who are going to make all of that happen. So that's our story from Coral Springs, and I hope I've left some time for some questions.
So going back to your question of organizational culture and David's point about the sweet spot, how do you link this process to your hiring practices so that when you have these low-level program managers, that you hire people who not only have worked their way up through the ranks and maybe really good at subject matter, but also have the analytical thinking skills to make the right decisions so that you, when you empower them, that they're actually doing what you want them to. How do you make that linkage?
Well, in the hiring practice itself, one of the things that was very helpful is that we would do a full-day training exercise for all new employees to try and bring them up to date with what we're trying to accomplish in our way of doing things. And that was really important because we found, over the years we had kind of trained most of our employees, and they were pretty far up to date. But new employees, they're coming in cold, and we wanted to make sure that we're bringing them up to the same level. The question about, especially mid-level supervisors, is a more difficult one because we all have experience with some mid-level supervisors who were great employees in the field, and for whatever reason, they're not cut out to be a supervisor. And what we recognized is we talked a lot about empowerment. We talked a lot about working with our employees, having everybody on the same team. But that doesn't mean that you don't make the hard decisions when you have to. And when you say, we would say blame the process, not the person. We would say that over and over again, but if it's the same person making the same mistake over and over again, you know that the process of hiring and firing maybe is a problem too. And sometimes you just have to take that employee and put them back in a slot where they're not making those same mistakes over. Does that answer your question?
It does. I think your idea of having the training on the front end, that you are bringing it throughout the organization, starts that process.
Who else? More questions? Quiet group.
So how often, did you regularly do exercises for the senior management of the organization to more up to speed than management of their department, since really it's that departmental use cascade down the organization that makes sure that you really achieve the right outcomes.
Okay, so I asked for questions, and then you guys hand me the hard ones, right? And that is a hard one. I think one of the changes that we made pretty early on was that we always had meetings with the city manager and the department director about their objectives. And one of those meetings was to agree on the objectives in the first place, because it never works if the department is out there doing their own objectives, which they should be, because there are a lot of objectives that belong to the department that they can use and nobody else even really knows about, and they need to keep those. But there are also some objectives where the city manager has in mind, I need this from you this year, and if it's not clearly spelled out and shown in the department's objectives, then you're missing that opportunity. So, first of all, they have to have that time where they're agreeing on the objectives together. The city manager says, okay, it's a two-way conversation. Sometimes the department director says, I know you want that, but I can give you this, I can't necessarily give you that. And the city manager has to be able to listen to that. So it is an agreement there. And then it's about 3 times a year when they would have follow-up conversations. And certainly, we were doing that Excel spreadsheet and sending it to the city commission, and there's a lot of conversations going on with the department when those results are really good, because you can't forget that. Sometimes the results are really good, and you need to be celebrating that. You need the employees to feel great about that. You need the community to feel great about that. And when the results are less than expected, you have to have another conversation. Why is that? There's time for us to make a mid-course adjustment here. How are we going to make that mid-course adjustment? Do you need more help from the city manager's office in making that mid-course adjustment? So there was this constant, I think, conversation, constant give and take with the city manager's office and the department. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. Well,
Let me tag in here just a second. This is rarely something where you can turn a switch and suddenly the departmental leadership is analytic and in tune with data-driven decision making and so forth. With some of the organizations that are particularly good at this, they develop it, and in part they spot people that at earlier stages of their career, maybe they're budget analysts who are particularly good at analytic work and particularly attuned to results, and they give them additional responsibilities, and at some point they finally are appointing these people to leadership positions in the operating departments. In some cases, it's a matter of taking the current department head and somebody earlier was talking about the tendency to cut back on training and so forth. It's a matter of not doing that, of finding ways to develop that talent within that individual. It's not that you're trying to turn a department head into an analyst. It's a matter of being receptive to analytic opportunities and directing analysis to be done by somebody else, being receptive to the analytic work that is being done at lower levels and using that analysis to make the changes. Part of it's this mismatch between where the decision authority resides. The tendency in a lot of organizations is that the decision authority is way up here, not at the operating level. The operating level has real insights into what changes need to be made and an interest in making those changes, but lacks the decision authority to make them. The folks up here have the authority to make that change, but they're interested in big picture policy issues and really don't want to devote the time and attention to those operating details. And if you've got that kind of a mismatch, then you've got a pretty fundamental problem. And so that's why the performance management doctrine is saying, let's get that decision authority where it needs to be, with the folks who have those insights and the inclination and the patience to work with it. But let's also require that there be the information flow that reassures the folks at the top that we're making good progress.
I have a question. How often do you find that discussions about performance measurement and performance management take place during the budget process? I ask that because we do. Our initial budget meetings, we review process improvements and our performance measurement for the entire organization.
Yeah, and I think that among those that are serious about performance management, it does happen then. The question is that the only time? Is the only time that we think about those performance measures and whether we're making progress, does that only happen at that one instance where we're presenting a budget or we're presenting our budget recommendation to the budget department or to the manager and so forth? Is it confined to them, or is it in fact happening periodically through the year? And that is the distinction. If it's not, it needs to at least be happening annually, but ideally it's not confined just to that annual conversation, and then we let it lie, and then try to get it geared up again a year later.
We'll take one more and then we're going to let these good people go.
Talk about when things go bad and how you correct those things that are going bad. Are you able to get the resources you need to correct those issues, or what happens? Do you just drop those issues, or what do you do?
That's a really good question, and that's where David talks about making sure that performance management is part of your culture, and that's where that really matters. And so if you're really in tune with your entire organization, and that really matters to you when things go bad. You're not going to just give up on the goals that you've committed to, but sometimes you need to do a mid-course adjustment. And that's where we just talked about, you do performance management once a year in your budget process. That doesn't work. A lot of things happen in that 1 year, and there's a lot of potential for things to go bad in that 1 year. So you need to be staying on top of it. And so in the first quarter, when you see things have really changed, then we would look for renegotiation, and we would look to the department first to find out what's going on. Sometimes it's simply not possible to meet that goal, and maybe there's a more important goal to everybody that we would like to substitute. And that's really important, not to just let it lie, but to talk about it, to understand it, first among staff, and then to make sure that your commission is in tune with it too.
All right, well, it looks like everybody was really engaged in this topic, so great. Maybe we'll bring it back for a future conference. But thank you so much to our panel.